Harrison on WNBC. WNBC. No, it's Midnight Touch After Dark. How's it going, everybody? Wednesday night, hump day. Wednesday's hump day, even though most people get it on the weekend or not at all.
Praising boom!
That's right. I'm, of course, narrator speaks Robert Meyer Burnett, coming to Shabby Road Studios with me, Mr. Tom Connors.
You know, you always rub that into me. That's so rude. You keep saying it's hump day, making me think I'm going to get late at some point, and it never happens.
How do you think I feel?
You're the one in help. That's your own fault. I'm not the one over here going, it's hump day, we're all going to get laid, like Rob is.
Let me tell you, next time I get some, it's going to be on the news. You're going to see it's going to be breaking news on CNN. Big banner headlines on the front page of the New York Times. And with us, as always, is the ever-lovely, vivacious, the effervescent, the internet geek goddess herself, Miss Becca Randall.
Hello.
Yes. Okay. All right. That's enough. So that's enough of that. Yes. Like I said, it's hump day. Just reminding myself that my sex life is like the Sahara Desert. Dry, devoid of human life. So, but that's another story. So anyway, yeah, we're gonna try to keep this a nice tight show.
Praising boom.
So anyway, so what happened today? Watchmen. Okay. Let me just start. Let me start by saying this. Okay. I like the Watchmen. I like the Watchmen. The original graphic novel. I read it a number of years ago. Very good. I'm not one of those people like, who's obsessed with the Watchmen. It's good. It was good. I read it. And I don't know if I
Actually, it's probably one of my favorite graphic novels of all time, to be honest.
You ever read Watchmen?
Who, me?
Yes.
No,
yes,
I had never heard of it. Or I've heard of it. It's one of those things just does not stay in my brain. It's just I don't think it's for me.
See, if you want it to stay in your brain, you have to make sure your head is up straight, and that makes it tilt to the side. Oh no, that's
maybe I mean, my eyes going right over to those Pokemon, and I don't like Pokemon, so it looks like Payday, and I don't like Payday.
Payday.
Yeah, the video game where you have to play with other people in masks.
Oh yeah, and somebody's going to turn on you.
Yeah, I don't know. I never played it because it was multiplayer. So.
Well, I know of it, but it's these are all guys. There must be a cult of Rorschach. This is not. I don't know what this is, but this doesn't look like Watchmen. Honestly,
I'm trying to figure that shit out myself yet.
I don't know what is going on here. Rob, please do a rant on Watchmen. I don't have an attachment enough to Watchmen to get angry about it.
I can rant on it. All day. But I don't think you guys will like it. I don't think you guys will like what I have to say.
I know what Watchmen is. I love it. It's probably one of my favorite graphic novels. What the fuck is this?
Oh, good. I'm glad I didn't have no, this looked like shit. This looked like I would be angry having to watch it. And I'm scared to death that you guys are going to be like, oh no, this is the best thing ever.
No. This doesn't even resemble Watchmen in any way.
No, it doesn't. No.
Outside of a Rorschach mask. That's it. And I think they showed Rorschach in the clip, and his mask is like this silver shit. Looked like reflective, and we've seen Ozzy, old man, Jeremy Irons, and what the fuck is Don Johnson doing in this?
I have no idea. He's the obligatory John Travolta aging actor part there.
Yeah, why does Don Johnson have a hat? Why is he playing a cowboy hat? Or why is he playing the character you used to play with the cowboy hat? Rather, what was that character?
Sonny Crockett.
Yeah, no, he had didn't he play this character before? I remember
something like that. Yeah.
I don't know.
Able to spin off like that. Something.
You guys having trouble hearing me?
Yeah, a little bit.
I thought it was
my headphones.
I was fine. What?
Everything was blowing you out before. Like your volume was low. Okay. Everything else was high.
Okay, hold on. Let me turn that down. I gotta turn the gain up on my mic here.
So yeah, basically for Mecca and those out there who are not familiar with what the actual Watchmen story is, the story takes place in an alternate 1985 where the Cold War did not end.
No, the Cold
So,
War. Not so much that the Cold War didn't end. Everything was of the same up until Vietnam.
yeah, basically, because that's when you're right. Because that's when Dr. Manhattan showed up, and he's like the equivalent of Superman in this world. He can see all time infinitely at once, or experience all time infinitely at once, as far as that goes, and like really weird shit. And he's like just so above us as far as like his mentality and everything. Like he doesn't even see humanity as the same way he used to and stuff. And then there's another group of old superheroes that are basically at this point in the story when it first begins, superheroes have been banned. Kind of like the whole Accords thing.
Well, yeah. Well, like I said, the superheroes they've kind of aged out of. They've kind
But
of
they're
aged
still not
out.
allowed to be doing what they're doing. The only one who is the comedian who just gets killed in the beginning because he's working for the government. And otherwise, Rorschach is running around as a vigilante. The cops are looking for him. Night Owl or whatever hell his name is, he hasn't been active in how many years in the beginning of the movie? And what the hell's the chick's name?
Silk
Spectre. Silk Spectre, who is actually the original Silk Spectre's daughter, is also supposed to be semi-retired and all this stuff. And Ozymandias is a businessman now, and there's this whole like convoluted thing where the world has moved on from superheroes, but the Cold War is rising because they keep moving the doomsday clock closer and closer to midnight, meaning that
there's a nuclear
war is imminent.
Over again. Yeah, and it's partly because of Dr. Manhattan, and it's yeah,
because basically Dr. Manhattan became our ultimate weapon during Vietnam, so now the whole world's scared of us. It's kind of where it starts. Yeah.
Greetings to Robert Meyer Burnett. How you doing, sir?
Oh, somebody just invited me on this chat, so I figured, what you were talking about. I'm like, I had to join.
Watchmen.
Yeah, one of my favorite things in the world. TikTok, TikTok, TikTok. It's the end of the world again. It's Damon Lindelof. What more could it? Why wouldn't it be the end of the world?
Probably just breaking down what the original story of the Watchmen was, because like Mecca is not too familiar with it, and in case some of our audience is. But yeah, basically somebody's killing superheroes then at this point, and it's all they start to kind of notice that it's part of a plan. Somebody has a plan. Something's going to go down. Something big is going to happen. Nobody knows what until it's too late, though, kind of thing.
And I just want to say, the comic book, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons comic, is one of the greatest comic books ever written. Yes. It's as much a meta story about superheroes and the comic book medium as it is a great comic book story. And it's one of the most erudite superhero comics, if not the most ever written.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case with whatever this is. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, and I love that they brought back Don Johnson, but again, I don't. What I really object to is how Alan Moore has been treated over the last 33 years. Based, they keep this project in print, whether it's Doomsday Clock, so they don't have to pay him, and the rights will never revert back to him. And I think it's. He doesn't take credit or money for any of these things, and it's really sad, and it bums me out. On his Miracle Man comic, when it was republished by Marvel, it just said by the original writer. That's what it said in the credits. It didn't even have his name on the comic.
That's a low.
Isn't that the whole thing with keeping it in print constantly? I think you said something about that before, Rob, too.
Yeah, I mean, because that's as long as they keep these things, like he's not getting. He's not a consultant on this. Here's what I'm like. I don't know what you guys thought of Doomsday Clock. I didn't think much of it. I thought it was actually fan fiction. It was like a fan film. There were some interesting things in it, but it's like Watchmen is one of the smartest what he's drawing upon, what Alan Moore was drawing upon when he was writing that comic, there's so many allusions to literature, to pop culture. It's amazing. It's an amazing work. And yes, without spoiling anything for Mecca,
it's okay. Please spoil it.
well, the ending is a bit controversial because it's sort of a riff on an old Outer Limits episode called The Architects of Fear. And the movie, which that's a whole nother story, but they significantly changed the ending of the comic for the movie. Which I don't hate the ending of the movie, but
I actually think that the ending of the movie makes sense for the movie.
Right, exactly. It does. Because the ending in the comic relies on a lot of backstory that just wasn't in the film. But the movie itself, to me, it's not so much an adaptation as it is a translation. They didn't really adapt the Watchmen. They just sort of translated it to another medium. So much of it is just recreations of the panels from the comic, but they're not what the movie is not as meta. It doesn't really, I don't think it's a great adaptation, but that's just me.
Well, part of the thing I have, part of the problem I have with the Watchmen, the movie version of Watchmen, as opposed to the Alan Moore graphic novel, is that it kind of, okay, listen, think what you want of Zack Snyder. I am not a huge Zack Snyder fan, and one of the things I got from the comic was the overall message was that superheroes and the real world do not mix. If there were superheroes running around in our world, it would be a disaster. And ultimately, superheroes should not be like this. And what I got from Zack Snyder's film was, yeah, you know what? Wouldn't it be awesome if all superheroes were like this? Yeah, kick ass. I'm like, yeah, you're kind of missing the point, Zach. And and the whole thing about the ending with the giant squid, I hate to say it would have looked silly to have a giant
squid. And the movie does make sense for the movie. And if you take out all the Snyderisms and like what you're saying, Rob, because yeah, it's like there's this bit in the movie where you have Silk Spectre and Night Owl or whatever kicking ass, and it's like it's so glorified that I'm like, I think you're right. At that moment, I was like, I don't know if Snyder really understands this concept or what the overall kind of not arc, but subject matter or message of the actual story is. I don't know if you guys are getting it.
Yeah, I have no doubt that Zack Snyder loves Watchmen, but I think he just gets the wrong things out of it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, there's, it really requires it's a real deconstruction of the whole superhero mythology, iconography, all of it. What does it mean? And through a political lens, I'll tell you what I thought was sort of interesting about when the comic was written, when it came out in the mid '80s, the idea of Richard Nixon being elected to, I think he's elected to a fourth term. He's serving his fourth term in the White House. Well, at that time, that made sense. But when you're making a film that comes out in 2000, I think it came out, 2007? When you're doing that and you're portraying Richard Nixon again, where you're 20 years beyond even Watchmen, it doesn't make sense anymore. These tropes, these things that were a product of their times needed to be reinterpreted for modern audiences. So most people are watching this, you're wondering, why is Richard Nixon, why even set the movie in 1985 anymore or 1986? You needed to update it and adapt the film and make those concepts that Moore was grappling with, make them relevant to our age. And it would have been really sort of difficult to do that because, like, there's an issue 5 of Watchmen. The comic is called Fearful Symmetry, and it basically is an episode. The way it's designed, page wise, it's forward and backwards. The way that Dave Gibbons used the panel design, it was a whole commentary on comic books as a medium. And there's all that, it all plays off on you. If you're an astute comic reader and you've been reading comics for a long time and you read Watchmen, it's a complete deconstruction of the entire medium of comics and what they represent and what superheroes represent. But in a movie, unless you reinterpreted a lot of that to bring the same message across, a lot of it's lost because in the case of the Watchmen comic book, the medium was part of the message. And watching an adaptation, or basically a translation, when you're watching actual comic book panels recreated, as much as that's cool, it's not really conveying what Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were trying to convey in the original text. And I think that plays out. Again, another moment, there's a scene in Vietnam in the movie. And in that scene in the movie, they use the Ride of the Valkyries, the piece of music from Wagner, which of course was popularized as far as a Vietnam thing in Apocalypse Now. Well, when you're using and in Apocalypse Now, it was used to show something incredibly ridiculous. They're playing Wagner to scare the natives as the helicopters swoop in to attack this village where the NVA soldiers, I guess, were. Well, if you're using a pop culture reference to another movie about Vietnam in your movie, you're not even referencing, it's not even about Watchmen anymore. It's about somebody else's movie. You're like, oh, it's Apocalypse Now because it's Zack Snyder's thinking, well, every movie about Vietnam, every Vietnam scene needs the Ride of the Valkyries now. And it was just strange. I mean, it was weird to watch. And I'm like, what am I supposed to take from this? Is it some meta commentary on watching movies? Or is this because this is the only thing he knows about Vietnam is Coppola's Apocalypse Now? Like, why would you do that? And I was confused as a lover of the comic and as an astute movie viewer. I'm like, what are you trying to say here? And it's you should be making reference to America's involvement in foreign wars or something, or where our own police actions are going awry the same way. And of course, Vietnam plays out differently in the comics. I mean, in the Watchmen comic than it did in life. But it was just, what does it all mean? And I don't think Zack Snyder could give you an answer. And you can tell when you watch the movie that I don't think he's getting what's going on.
Yeah, I agree completely, because you're right. It's the situation where if they would have updated it, you could have had Vietnam be Desert Storm.
Right.
Could have had the Cold War. Yeah, the Cold War equivalent would be right. It could be right after 9/11, to where the world's actually kind of questioning, well, we got rid of all these superheroes and 9/11 happened. Now what? You could have really played with that.
Right.
It may have been too close to 9/11 when Snyder did the film. I'll grant him that, but
the film was released in 2010 because we covered it like on my old podcast.
That's true. It was a little later than I thought. It is only, but it's been 10 years almost now, hasn't it? God, I thought it was older than that for some reason. I thought it was like 06, 05 maybe, but you're right. It was 2010.
No, it's 2009, March 6th.
2009. Yeah, okay. I knew. Yeah, I'm trying to remember when I saw it, and it was like, yeah.
But so yeah, you're right that what you just brought up, 9/11, Desert Storm, because all of these allusions to the past, I mean, things that were going on at the time, for audiences who were watching in 2009 who had never read the comic, which was 2006 it started or something. I mean, I started in 1986. You were still pretty close. I mean, we're just a little bit over a decade since America left Vietnam when the comic was written. And now kids today, people today, your audience, they're like, what's Vietnam? And it's a whole different thing, and you needed to really reinvent it. Same with Richard Nixon. The whole idea of Richard Nixon being reelected president again and again and again, especially after Watergate, that added to the absurdity of it all.
Yeah.
And
yeah, well, like I said, there's a lot of things. I really think, like I said, Zack Snyder probably, I wouldn't even call him the right guy to direct that film, not even for the wrong reasons. I mean,
visually, yeah, but not.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Zack Snyder's always been more of a visual. He's paid attention, a lot closer attentions to visuals than he has to the story. For as much as people love something like 300, it comes across kind of. Thinking back now, it comes across as rather shallow.
I haven't watched it in years, but I bet if I watched it now, just like Watchmen, if I watched it now, I'm sure it would feel like hollow. I get what you're saying, because thinking back now on 300, I have no desire to go back to it. But if I didn't hate it, but I didn't really get any nourishment out of it. emotionally or entertainment wise. It just, yeah, it was cool for what it was, and everybody was quoting it for God knows how long there. But again, same thing. I mean, his Dawn of the Dead remake, again, another one. I have not rewatched that one nearly as much as I'll watch the original Dawn of the Dead 2-3 times a year. I don't know if Robert's the same way, but
the original Dawn of the Dead, Romero's, is one of my favorite movies of all time.
I know, yes. I figured you're like me. You'd rather watch that any day.
Yeah, but I will say this. I mean, I was so adamantly opposed to Zack Snyder's remake, which, by the way, James Gunn wrote.
Yes.
I was so against it, but I actually liked it. I was so primed to hate that movie, and I went to the theater with a scowl on my face and my arms crossed in front of my chest. I'm like, fuck this movie, but I liked it. You know, and the director's cut is even longer. I mean, I even like that too. I mean, there's something about it that I really enjoyed, and I still think that's Zack Snyder's best movie. Probably. Even though I must admit I'm a fan of Man of Steel.
Well, most people are. I'm not. That's it's a fun superhero movie, I guess, but it's not a Superman movie to me. It bears very little resemblance to the character of Superman.
I've always looked at it as a science fiction first contact story.
Kind of, yeah. Shazam had more in common with Superman.
I kind of look at it as a Dragon Ball Z movie. Jeez, everybody's huge run-ups and they're bouncing off each other and clouds of dust being kicked up. It's
so yeah. So I can imagine you saw this trailer today, obviously, Robert. Let's get to the Lindelof Watchmen now.
Well,
something that many people have been looking forward to, I guess.
I mean, I looked at it and there was nothing in it like, okay, so there's a Rorschach cult. I guess his journal has been published or something by the New Frontiersman, and it looked interesting from the sense that, I mean, I'm going to watch it just because the Watchmen comic's one of my favorite things ever, and I've read it so many times in my life, and I'm curious to see what they're doing with it. I like the fact that it's not a direct adaptation, but I was excited when I was reading Doomsday Clock too, when I read the button and then the lead up to Doomsday Clock, and I found Doomsday Clock really sort of. And I'm a fan of Jeff Johns' comic writing, but I really didn't like Doomsday Clock at all because, again, it was completely, it was the exact opposite point. It was making the exact opposite points of what the Watchmen comic was trying to do, which was, it wasn't subverting tropes or anything like that. It was actually embracing them all. And it was sort of, to me, it was in a way borderline offensive. But I understand why it was done. I mean, it was just weird to see a comic that was designed to look like the actual Watchmen comic and not understand, again, the DNA of what was baked into that comic series. It looked that way because you wanted, it's supposed to be a riff on I'll give you an example. This Watchmen trailer borrows all of the iconography from the comic, like the actual design of the comic, like the logo Watchmen. And again, the movie used it in the same way, and I guess it's branding, but it's like they're using that iconography inside the world of the show. Like you see the text, the logos of things on the side of that SWAT van or whatever it was with the yellow font, and it's just weird to me. It's just bizarre.
Well, yeah, it kind of takes to the second level what they did with the movie, and that was the Watchmen was never their name. It wasn't like the Watchmen was the name of the Avengers. They were originally the Minutemen or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then in the movie, they just changed their name to the Watchmen. And I get it, just to kind of save on some confusion for those who are not familiar with what the whole concept is. But from looking at this trailer, I guess, is it somewhat of a sequel? Does it?
Yeah, I guess. Somebody said it takes place I don't know if this is true, like almost 40 years after the comic. So wow. It's set in real time. And that, to me, that's interesting. So if you're going to take the comic book as gospel, which takes place in an alternate U.S.,
right,
with different history, we won Vietnam, Nixon served 4 terms, then maybe what we're talking about, they're going to move on and go, okay, the events of the Watchmen occurred. Now it's 40 years later, and where are we at? After Adrian Veidt's whatever Vite, after his plan was put into effect, where's the world now? And have the Watchmen, you know, so there's a cult of Rorschach, and I guess Ozymandias is still around, if that's who Jeremy Irons is playing.
Yep. That's
you know, and then what? I mean, I think that's sort of, so it's a sequel, it's not a reimagining. I just find it really interesting that, again, why be coy? You know,
what
it's
I'm going to get to is like the whole thing with the watches. It's like they're taking the whole Watchmen thing to the ultimate extreme. They're taking it to 11, and it doesn't need to go. I don't get it. I really don't. I mean, I get the TikTok thing, but it's almost like you're just pushing it with like I was saying with the whole calling them the Watchmen instead of the Minutemen or whatever it was in the other movie. It just, to me, it's like, are you trying to be clever and it's just coming off really stupid, or is it just me? Am I missing something?
This looks like they wanted to make a Purge, the TV show, but they had the rights to the Watchmen. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the iconography about the clocks, like Clockwork, when Dr. Manhattan goes to Mars and basically makes this beautiful clockwork glass sculpture, and there's all the stuff with Dr. Manhattan and the watchmaker and all of that, and the idea of the passage of time and all of those things, and who watches the Watchmen. But again, using all of this iconography, what is it supposed to mean in the context of what they're doing? Like the idea even of the yellow masks, it's such a weird amalgamation of the actual design of the comic book itself and the color they've used. And it's weird. I mean, it's a bizarre amalgamation of the actual physical comic book itself, the way the physical comic book was designed with the logos and things, because those weren't in-universe elements. Those were design elements that came when the book was being marketed. And they've incorporated that, just like they did in the movie. They incorporated that into the design of the film, and it's odd to me. It's all sort of strange.
It kind of reminds me of a line from Star Trek 4 when they're trying to interpret the probe's language. So we know we can replicate the sounds, but not the language. We would be responding in gibberish. That's what it seems like. They know all the iconography. They know all they just take bits and pieces here, but they don't know how to assemble it. It's like if somebody was trying to fix a car for the first time and had never seen one.
Right. Like the Telosians not seeing a human before. But yeah, I mean, and I want to reserve judgment because it is HBO and it's prestige, and I hope I want it to be good. I go into everything wanting to love it. I want to love everything because I know how much it takes to make things, and it's really, really difficult. But what's really interesting is when you see something that like Watchmen is such a, as far as comic books go, as far as graphic novels go, it towers above the rest. I mean, it has such a reputation, and it is an incredibly smart, very dense read. And when someone comes in and goes, yeah, we're going to reimagine Watchmen, I'm like, well, you better be damn smart. You better know of what it is you speak, because Alan Moore is a very well-read, very educated, very literary person. And whether you read a Swamp Thing run, whether you're reading Promethea, whether you're reading Watchmen itself, Lost Girls, whatever it is, his novel Jerusalem, whatever you're reading by Alan Moore, it always seems to me like these people that are, whether you're writing Doomsday Clock or whether you're following up with this TV show, it's the people that are making these things aren't quite up to Alan Moore's level. And certainly Zack Snyder and the screenwriters of Watchmen, David Hayter and Alex Z, it was almost like you're following on the heels of somebody who won a Nobel Prize in literature, and you're in a community college English class, and you've decided, I'm going to adapt Watchmen. And it's but we'll see. Maybe it's good. I want it to be good.
Well, nobody wants anything really to be bad.
No,
that's the thing. But sometimes there's just no dancing around. I mean, you got it. I mean, if it's bad, you have to say, well, you know what, disappointed by that. But at the same time, a trailer is just supposed to give you a indication of what it's it's going to be something's going to be about, so it's going to be excited. And I'm more confused by this than anything.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, what is it? That's what they're being cagey. It's that whole mystery box thing. Let's not tell anybody what it really is. Like, if it really is indeed a sequel to the Watchmen that takes place 38 years after the events of the movie, just say that. I'd be interested in that. I'd be like, oh, that's cool. But you know, the idea is everyone's like, it's funny because it's a brand name, but who do they think their audience is? You know, Westworld, it was kind of the same thing. I know it's Christopher Nolan, Jonathan Nolan, but Westworld is based on a crazy 1973 movie that Michael Crichton, you know, who created ER and wrote a number of novels and was a very wealthy man. He directed that movie back in the day. And I understand they completely reinvented Westworld. So that made sense. But Watchmen, as far as comic books go, it's considered one of the great graphic novels ever written. You had a film adaptation. It's not like it's this obscure thing. And they're trying to sell it like everyone knows exactly what it is. And you don't know anything about what it is. Like, what is it supposed to be?
Well, according to the First Grade Jedi, he just looked it up, and it is a sequel to the comics. I know that's not exactly answering the rhetorical question kind of thing, but we also had a super chat I want to get to real quick. Mark C., thank you so much for the $5 super chat. Can we please quit deconstructing our heroes and let them be inspirational? I'm not going to argue with that.
Well, there's that problem with the inspirational versus the deconstructed heroes. I mean, it just seems like we have an entire generation, and I'm going to point the finger at me, Generation X. We've kind of grown up with this whole thing where our heroes have let us down, and we're just seeing that over and over again. Just the tearing down of heroes and various pop culture mythos. And it really is starting to wear on me. It really is. I mean, it has its place, like I said, in Watchmen and the Dark Knight and stuff like that. But everything doesn't have to be this way.
Well, and it isn't even so much deconstructed in Watchmen, like Robert was saying just a little bit ago, and he was making a point, at least that's how I got it, was it's true. The whole goal of this story was Ozzy was trying to make the heroes again, really, and make the world to where they're needed and make the world a peaceful place and do the ultimate to basically save everybody at once by unifying the entire Earth. You know, I see where he's got a very Thanos kind of outlook on this whole thing. Like he thinks he's doing the right thing for everybody.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he's trying to save. He definitely is trying to save the world. But what's really interesting is Watchmen was like, it was such a takedown of the superheroes. It was such a deconstruction of all of them, and it. You know, I think you're right. But even what Ozymandias does is fake. You know, he wants to unite the world through in his hubris. He thinks that he can gin up some fake reason to unite mankind against an attack. And I mean, I think that the comic is such a takedown of superheroes. It's such a takedown of and there's really no heroes in Watchmen. I mean, even the men on the street, the men and women on the street that you come to know, they're all incinerated at the end of the comic. Yeah. And
I do think that the story is kind of setting up that Rorschach is kind of what the actual hero should be. I think, even though he's dark and he does a lot of bad things, he's the only one who really, at the end, kind of understands what the hell's going on and that this is wrong.
Right.
Though, you know, it's
he's seemingly the only one guided by some sort of morality. Granted, it's his own morality. It's a bit skewed, but I mean, he does have some.
He's the only man who's sane through his insanity. That's the way I always used to put it. Even though he's the most insane man in the group, he has the most clarity when it comes to what is right and wrong.
I agree with you. You know, and that's the his worldview is what's driven him sort of insane. I mean, he's not insane. He is the only sane man, but he has this fierce conviction to that justice can be served. It's just that in his mind, is humanity worth saving? You know,
right?
They'll look up at me and they'll ask me, save us, and he'll say no, and I'll say no, I won't. but I mean, he's working for a higher power. I think he's working for the idea of justice.
And that's a very key line, because when he says that in the beginning, he's like, "No, I won't save you," or whatever. I mean, is he saying it in the reference to what he's talking about? At the end of the movie, he kind of is the one who saves everybody.
Yeah.
Even though, it's not the way we would figure it would pan out. But maybe that's what we're seeing here is the results of that. And I'm not against that, but I'm just fearful of how Lindelof's going to handle it, basically.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, because the end of Watchmen is so cynical, because everything that Adrian tried to do is going to get unraveled if Rorschach's journal gets out, and the insinuation at the end of the comic is, of course, it's going to get out. And I guess apparently because of the New Frontiersman, which is not exactly a paragon of journalism in the Watchmen universe, does publish a series of excerpts on Rorschach's journal. Adrian would have the money and the power to deny it all and talk about this ridiculous spin. This makes no sense at all, and he could probably get over it, but there's still clearly a Rorschach cult in this show, and even a Rorschach cult is not exactly the most fiercely original idea in the world. We've seen Batman cults, we've seen Joker cults. It looks, here's the thing, the Watchmen series looked to me very pretentious in a way, but I don't know. I'm gonna have to wait and see.
I think pretentious is right. Pretentious, and I think they're trying to go for something that they don't quite understand, for sure. I don't know.
Well, I really wish that Alan Moore would be like a creative consultant on these things. I find it crazy that, look, he's taken a stance on these adaptations that he's not interested. He doesn't even want to get paid when they do it. But it just seems like Watchmen is really the product of, and look, I get it, that what Alan Moore did was he took the old Charleston characters that DC acquired, and he was going to do a riff on them, and they told him, you can't destroy, you can't deconstruct these Charlton heroes because we want to be able to use them later. So he did riffs on those heroes and made it his own. But Watchmen is such the product of one man's imagination that the idea of strip mining it, the way they've been doing with, say, Doomsday Clock, and now they're doing with this show, the idea that people are doing this to the creator's vision in a way is, to me, it's exactly the opposite of what Alan Moore would want. It's the exact opposite of what's contained in his writing. I mean, it's like the creator of the original Watchmen, it would be so adamantly opposed to what's being done to his property. It's to me, it's a perfect encapsulation of where we're at in the modern age. Nothing has meaning anymore. Nobody puts any importance. Literature doesn't matter, because we can all come along. If something's really good and it's really well respected, then let's take it down a peg. Let's take it off the shelf and break it. Who is Alan Moore anyway? Who cares what he wrote 33 years ago or whatever? What does that matter? We can be better. And I see this attitude permeating a lot of our pop culture now.
Yes.
And it's like, we can do better. I mean, Star Trek. But I mean,
no, you're totally right, Robert. Not to stop you there, but it is a very valid point, because we've come to a point where it used to be, how can we pay respect to this? How can we pay homage to this? How can we do this without upsetting the fans and getting new people? Now it's more like what you just said. We can do it better.
Or how can we market it to as many people as possible? This is great intellectual for like the 5 people who will get it, but how do we make this into a franchise? How do we committee write, and how do we focus group and market this? How do we turn this into the next Avengers?
Will want to watch it, how every cat and dog and mouse in the world will want to watch it. It's like Scrooged, remember?
It is exactly like Scrooge.
We found out that cats watch television. So if you put these mice on there, that's what we've gotten.
Oh, dark and edgy is popular, so let's film a shot in broad daylight and light it and adjust it in the color timing so that you can't see. a damn thing. Like, can I share? Can I do a screen share? Will we get copyright claimed if I do one image?
Probably not image.
Okay, well, this is from their trailer. This really bothered me. I would be angry having to sit there and watch this. I did nothing to this at all. This is just how it looks. Just bright as day, broad daylight, and it looks like it's in the dark. Like
It's
this
it's
isn't.
it's like Titans when they with the blue filter
Mhm.
and it's nighttime. Yeah, it looks that.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's like, I guess you guys were talking about the same thing that I was talking about. They announced the global brand management team for Star Trek.
Yeah.
And I went online. I did on my own YouTube show. I did a live chat, and I said, you know, the Burnett axiom. What I've been saying is, you can't put your universe before your characters and your stories. It's your characters and stories that build your universe. And Star Trek needs a global brand manager. What Star Trek needs is great Star Trek. Then you build a brand around great Star Trek, great characters and great stories. And everybody today, it's, you know, you read about, oh, we've got the animated show, and we've got this coming, and we got that coming, and all this. And I'm like, yeah, but it would be better if all of those things were good first. You know, rather than they're just planning that Star Trek is now a brand, and that all of this stuff that they're pushing forward is going to be great. And what's really interesting to me, not to make this about Star Trek, but when 10 years ago, when Bad Robot put out, it was just the other day, Star Trek '09 is now 10 years old this week. And everything that they created, all of the products that they created, the video game that became ill-fated, the toys, which were not good. It was like they created all this merchandising that nobody wanted, and it all failed. Because you have to have the product, you have to have something that people love first. And with Watchmen, they're acting like they're acting like the reputation so precedes this show that it's a done deal that we can make this show as edgy and cool and hip, and look at how awesome this is. I mean, that's to me what it's coming out, and it's demanding that we watch this, and that we already feel that what we're seeing is awesome, and it's so important. And you know, what was important and what was awesome was Alan Moore's original graphic novel. You know, I mean, and they keep the same thing, like Doomsday Clock is coming, as if Doomsday Clock was going to be the greatest comic event of all time. Of course it was not. You know, and even Watchmen, when it was coming out, nobody knew what it was. It's gained its reputation over the years, now over the decades, because of just how good it was, and what an interesting re-examination of the concept of comic book heroes and masked adventurers, vigilantes, whatever. And it has gained its reputation based on the fact that it's really good.
Well, didn't it win the Peabody Award or something like that? And then they changed the rules so a graphic novel could never win again after that.
Oh, maybe so.
It was one of those. If it wasn't
the Hugo or something,
one of them. Yeah, whatever I'm trying to think of what it was. Somebody knows the actual award. Sorry, in the chat, let us know. But yeah, it won the award, and then they changed the rules after that so that graphic novels couldn't win ever again.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
No, I was about to say though, there's you bring up a good point though about they're bringing this out, and they said, oh, because of the Watchmen brand, you think it's going to be awesome, right? There's a guy on YouTube, he has a channel named Literature Devil, and actually he was bringing that up, very same point up, is that previously in the 60s and the 70s, whatever, you had Star Trek, you know, in order you had to prove, not to bring this about Star Trek again, but you
know everything is about Star Trek.
I know, yes. It definitely is.
As it should be.
It should be, yeah. But you had to win, you had to prove to the audience what you were doing was worth watching. You had to put out the best product you could. Now, because of things like binge watching and streaming, they feel the creators of these things feel they are entitled to your viewership by default out of the gate. And there's this whole thing about, again, I bring this up all the time. this idea of, well, these are fictional characters and we can do whatever you want, and you're gonna like it anyway. Like, no, we're not. Have you seen what's going on? We have plenty of other entertainment choices. And it's this whole thing about, the whole thing of Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come.
Right.
Not necessarily the case.
I think
you have to prove what you're building is worth me spending my time on.
I couldn't agree with you more. But now there's this idea, because of marketing and the global reach and how much money all these things cost. I mean, I understand why they are thinking this way, but they make the people that are making these decisions. When I read that article in Deadline about the Star Trek brand, the Star Trek brand has never been a juggernaut brand the way, say, Star Wars was. It's never been that way. It's always been more of a niche brand. And yet the way they were talking about Star Trek is like, well, we're gonna make video games and this and that. I'm like, but there's always been Star Trek video games. There's Star Trek Online right now. There's and the Star Trek fans they don't have the fan base is simply not as big as these other. It's not as big as Marvel. It's not as big as Star Wars, and you're never going to. They keep trying to turn Star Trek into that, and they're acting like Watchmen is this kind of a brand too. Watchmen is a very erudite comic. Even people that love comic books, you have a small percentage of comic book readers that are big fans of Watchmen because it's dense. It's not user friendly to your 12-year-old comic book reader. You don't want to read Watchmen. And yet it was really interesting. I love Blade Runner 2049, but they acted like Blade Runner 2049 was going to come out and be this gigantic movie. And I was thinking to myself, why would you think that? Blade Runner didn't even make money when it first came out. The only people that think, and look, I'm not taking anything away from Blade Runner, but the average man on the street is Blade Runner has not permeated the pop culture. It's permeated a very small faction of pop culture. In Hollywood, a lot of people hold Blade Runner in high regard, but it's not like people were clamoring for this Blade Runner sequel and ran out to go see it. As much as I thought it was a beautiful film, and I really liked Blade Runner 2049, but it didn't make any money. But this idea that it was this thing to be promoted and like, oh my God, it wasn't. I don't even know where that idea came from. And I think the same is true of Watchmen. The film certainly wasn't a gigantic hit. It did all right. But they're touting this show like everybody should know what it is. And everybody's going to just run out. I think people are looking at it. Most audience members are looking at it and go, what the hell is this? Like, what is this? And even I, as a Watchmen fan, who've read the comic probably 100 times, I'm still looking at it going, what is this? And yet they're selling it like it's a franchise. Like it's this brand new thing, this amazing thing that we should all love. And they're approaching all that, like you just said, you've got to let something earn. It's got to become good. You can't just decide something's going to be good, market it, and think it's going to be a worldwide success. And there's this weird thought now that that's what they're doing, because all they're doing is making franchise or known things, known titles. Hey, Watchmen's come out before. It's from a famous comic book, but the people that actually make the decisions don't even know why they're doing it. They're just like, oh yes, Watchmen's a brand. Well, do you know why it's a brand? Do you know anything about Watchmen? No, they make these decisions. They green light these things. It's such a weird, it's so bizarre. And then when it's like, making a Warcraft movie. Sure, it made money in China, but ultimately this Warcraft movie was a disappointment. Why would you think that making a Warcraft movie would necessarily work because the Warcraft game was successful? Just Warcraft in general as a movie, that's not what Warcraft is. It's this immersive game system that people have been playing. The whole point of Warcraft is to participate, be a player. And yet you make a movie and it's Warcraft. Everyone's going to go see it. Why would they? Like even Warcraft fans Why would you want to go watch a passive experience when you've been a Warcraft player for a decade? Why do you want to sit back and watch a movie and just go, oh yeah, I know those orcs, or I know that land? I mean, it's such a weird time that we live in, where everybody's trying to create these brands and they don't even have an underlying understanding. I mean, Veronica Hart, a friend of mine who works with her, who's taken over this Star Trek branding group, is supposed to be a great executive and smart and savvy and knows the Star Trek brand. But as somebody who worked for CBS for 3 years, the Star Trek fan base did not turn out and buy the Blu-rays that I worked on for 3 years. They didn't do it. The world has changed. And now they're treating this Star Trek. I read this brand management thing like, oh my God, we're going to make this global brand vibrant again. Well, when hasn't it been amongst its fan base? It hasn't gone away. There's still a big convention in Las Vegas every year.
Yeah,
and they're treating
people want, yeah.
And they're treating Watchmen the same way. Like, it's the Watchmen. It's I don't know.
I think a lot of it, they don't even have to be successful anymore. I wonder how much of it is these paired analytic sort of companies that they give reports back to the really high ups who might be really out of touch with things. You've got people like your Alex Kurtzman's just saying, well, paired analytics says we're #1, so this is working. And they don't actually even realize it. And they have no idea what actually works anymore because they're so far removed. And it really, to me, it feels like social media has come in and changed so much of everything that they can just fake or not even understand all of this information that they're given. Oh, well, everybody's talking about Star Trek Discovery. Like I made a video about this too, and I know Rob just did. They say that it's the #1 streaming service thing. Well, yeah, they can say that with the paired analytics and people will believe it because a lot of people just, don't have time to go and read through a whole article or do their own research.
Well, not only that, they don't read exact wording.
Mm-hmm.
Why Rob and you and we've had to talk about this before, because first of all, just to, the basics is paired analytics is just demand expressions. And what that means is if you hashtag Star Trek Discovery, whether it's hashtag Star Trek Discovery or hashtag Star Trek Discovery sucks, it counts as a demand expression.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean a view. It doesn't mean anything else other than that. So they're just monitoring internet traffic is all they're doing. And they did a story not even 5 days before this where Cobra Kai was the #1 show. So they even changed their own story. I think they just do the stories to favor whoever the hell they have to favor that week. Whoever's board members has to see a story saying that whatever show is #1. That's it.
Right.
To be honest.
Well, one of the money is always the big issue. Everybody's looking for all of this, what's going to be the next big thing. And I think what's really interesting is you now have these brands in the world, whether it's the MCU or whether it's Star Wars. These are brands that have literally had, people forget that Star Wars now is 42 years old. Coming up on a brand that's half a century old. The Marvel universe, Marvel Comics is almost 70 years old. And if you go back before Marvel was Marvel, some of those characters go back a long way. And kids have grown up. We grew up with those animated series. And so these brand names, Star Trek is, of course, now 53 years old. But as a brand, people are always pointing to these things going, well, the JJ movies, everyone's like, oh, they gross the most money, but they cost the most money as well. And they didn't make very much money. They were not successful. The cost to benefit analysis does not favor the 3 Star Trek films made by Bad Robot. And there's this weird thought that everybody wants the money. They look at Avengers, so they go, ooh, we're going to create the new MCU. And it's like, even the MCU started with one movie. What did they do? They started with one. Iron Man is basically a simple story of a man who undergoes a fundamental change in his attitude about the world. And even the end climactic battle is 2 guys in suits beating each other up over the fate of their company. It's not some apocalypse. And then they built from there. And nobody wants to do the groundwork. Everybody wants to get the next quarter, They want to get their millions and billions of dollars because we're only thinking in short term. But everybody who's truly successful in this business is thinking long term. And you watch, we're going to make all of these Star Trek shows. And we got animation, we got Section 31, and they're just assuming that these shows are going to be bought off on by us, the fan base, without any, I know a few things about the Picard series that are very distressing. This is from the writing perspective, the actual what's happened to the show. Well, let's just say there are many competing factions within the creative team of what this show is supposed to be. And there again, like with Discovery, there is not a unifying vision behind this show.
I have some theories. I heard the reports of they have this award-winning writer coming in, and my first instinct was, oh no, Alex Kurtzman is going to have all these visual effects shots that he wants to put into this, and how is he going to cut off the you-know-what of the writer who he's bringing in? That was my first thought.
Well, I mean, let's just say that you have an actor who has a lot of weight to throw around on this show. And Patrick Stewart, I mean, the funny thing is, Patrick Stewart, the man, is of course an actor. He's not Jean-Luc Picard. What he wants is he wants this show to be what he wants it to be. And the original conception of the show, as it was pitched, was something different. And then you have the writers that they've brought onto this show, and one of them, and again, I don't know this person, but one of the writers on the show created a TV series, The Closer, right? He wrote one episode of Enterprise. Now, I'm sure he's friends with some, the way television works is you hire people that to come into the writer's room. There's a lot of great genre writers that are in Hollywood that are working in television. And I know I could probably rattle off, if I was going to do a science fiction television series, there's 10 people that I would go get right now that I know. Some of them I know better than others that are veterans, genre television veterans. But not only that, they understand science fiction and they understand Star Trek. None of those people are working on modern Star Trek shows. And I don't get it. I don't understand why that is the case. And I think the Picard series is suffering from that very thing. Is that the people that are, and it's not just Akiva Goldsman and Alex Kurtzman, it's the other writers from television that they've brought in. And there's a lot of conflict in that writer's room because of it, because everyone's trying to figure out what kind of a show it should be. Well, I'll tell you what the show it's not going to be. It's not going to be very much of a Star Trek show. That's what it's not going to be. And it's unfortunate because it's like everything else. It's so funny, the hierarchy of things that when you're working in television and movies, the people that are working there, like you're not going to go back and read a Star Trek novel, even though, David Mack wrote a Star Trek novel it's about Section 31 about, an AI called Control. It was a hell of a lot better than what we saw on TV, but how David Mack was not credited when he already wrote a Star Trek novel about Section 31 called Control, about AI. Like, come on, man. I mean, it's so weird what goes on. And at the end of the day, as I've always said, if you make something great, your audience will follow you. Your audience will come along. So your primary concern should be to make it great. And if you're working on Watchmen, you've got big shoes to fill. And I hope you're up to the task.
Well, one of my personal theories about that, the writers, the whole thing with the writers, and you see, none of these writers have any real science fiction or genre experience. Maybe a couple of them. I keep thinking they want people who are more amenable. Yeah, blah. They want people who will agree to what they're doing. That's my personal thing. But I always come back to something what Frank Zappa said in the 80s about how you had in the 60s when you had a lot of experimental music being released. It wasn't the hip young guys approving it. It was the older guys in
Right.
the guards and the, on the feet on the desk. He says, well, I don't know, take a chance. Put it out, see if it sells. And then they get some success and they hire the hip young guy like an Alex Kurtzman or J.J. Abrams who say, no, we can't take a chance on that because that's not what the audience wants. And I know. And that's a huge problem now. Oh,
it's a huge problem. And also when you get Bad Robot, Secret Hideout, whatever, I think Secret Hideout being the secret base for Bad Robot or whatever, once you're in there and you're part of that, you want to hold on to those things because you want the money. It's all like everything else is about cash. Oh, it's James Duff, who's the writer that's working on the Picard series, who wrote the Enterprise episode Fortunate Son. But what I when it comes to this kind of this genre, science fiction, fantasy, and horror began as a literary genre. It's and the problem with television writers now is they've only ever written television. If you go back to the original Twilight Zone or Star Trek or Outer Limits, the people that were writing those episodes were not just TV writers, but they were novelists and playwrights. They were just different kinds of people, and I think they had stronger literary backgrounds. And so much of like you have a guy like James Duff who created, not to take away his credentials, but he wrote The Closer. That's a certain kind of a show. I'm sure he knew some people and got put on Enterprise, but the way that the industry works is you hire people that and you don't always get the right people to write on science fiction, especially Star Trek is a very specific kind of writing. And just like, Watchmen, it's okay, we're going to come in and reinvent what Alan Moore wrote. Okay. But why are you doing that? Like and look, again, it might be really good. Who knows? But they're trying to sell it to us like it's this incredible brand that everybody should know about. And I don't think it is. No. You got to make it great first. Like, if I'd read the first Game of Thrones, that's the only book I read. And when the series was coming on, I watched it and I was very taken with how well done it was. How unexpected it was. It was a great adaptation of the book, but it was relatively, for all of its backstabbing, it was low key. I mean, sure that you had epic episodes, but the epic nature of Game of Thrones was all about the human element. It wasn't so much, we didn't necessarily have to see a giant battle, because when Ned Stark was beheaded in the first season, everyone was so taken by that. And what was that? That was a betrayal of a man. Of a man who was just trying to be just, and he got fucked by the politics down in King's Landing. And that's what made it great. You don't need big giant episodes. The giant episodes are fun, but what made Game of Thrones so great was the character interplay and that everybody was a shade of gray, and now it's sort of turned into this, it's become not what it used to be. Because I understand why, but still, it doesn't make it as good as it was, and people have legitimate complaints. But nowadays, everyone seems to be thinking that their first show out of the gate is the beginning of this gigantic franchise that's going to make billions of dollars, and that kind of thinking is wrong. What you have to do is you have to start making your show good. The show has to be good. Don't think about the rest of your brand. Concentrate on the show, because the brand will follow. And it's like everything is look, it's this big brand, the Watchmen brand. Well, what Watchmen brand is that? Make the show good and then push the brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This isn't exactly Justice League or even Avengers. And that even goes for those kind of franchises. You can't just guarantee. Nobody knew that Iron Man was going to be the hit it was.
Nope.
Or that things were going to go the way they were at first with the Marvel series. I mean, everybody kind of had an idea, but they were like, never expected here would we be 20 some odd movies later with Endgame. I mean, granted, how you feel about that movie, it is Return of the King level accomplishment beyond. I mean, it should almost be in like the Guinness World Records at this point. It's a feat that's never been done. A cohesive 20-some film overarching story like that has never been done outside of on television before. Not at this scale, not to this immense size. And not everything is going to be able to do that, especially like what Robert was just saying. Star Trek is a niche, a niche franchise, and Watchers is like a niche of a niche of a niche franchise. I was also surprised how well that did in the box office. I was not expecting it to do that well, because it's not the most popular as far as like everybody knows who Superman and Batman are. The only people who know who the Watchmen are geeks like us, and a few other people who actually kind of got turned on by it. That actually was like, somebody's like, hey, check this out. Oh, I'm not into comics. No. You need to check this out. And they read it and they were like, oh, I see what you meant now. It was one of those gateway novels. I get that. But again, I don't see it being this mammoth. I don't even see it. If they're expecting this to be their next Game of Thrones, which is what somebody said in the chat before, no, not going to happen.
Well, unless it's good.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's got to be damn good.
Yeah.
I was about. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you might remember a guy by the name of Neil Bogart.
Yeah.
He used to run Casablanca Records. He used to say anything will sell with enough promotion behind it, and it just seems like that's what's going on here. They don't care what it is, as long as you get it out there, you promote it, and eventually, the audience will just come to us. That
only worked before the internet, though. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. Well, and that's what's really interesting is this audience, our genre fan, I call us all imagination connoisseurs. This audience is discerning, and we want everything to be good. We go into all these things wanting these things to be good. I think we all, a lot of us, some of us can be cynical, be like, well, it's going to suck. Even the people that say it's going to suck, you kind of want it to be good. Any genre fan, any comic book fan is going to tune in and watch this show, and they want it to be good. And the thing to me is in this day and age with the internet, you make it good. I mean, HBO already has subscribers, so the people that I know they want to pick up where the Game of Thrones audience is going to be left. And they're going to just assume that everybody who watches Game of Thrones is going to watch Watchmen, which isn't the case, by the way. There's a totally different, there's a crossover audience, of course, but there's it's a lot different. Just because people like Game of Thrones does not mean they're going to watch
Dragons,
Watchmen.
Boobs, and Swords can cross over with a lot more people than a very cynical, dark comic book.
Right.
Let me tell you, I have a brother. He was talking to me he never liked comic books, never liked superheroes, never liked any kind of fantasy or genre. He talked to me one time at a family function for 10 minutes about the Red Wedding. And I was the one saying to him, you know what? I don't know what any of this means. So it was just so surreal. I'm like, yeah, you know what? This is all the stuff you used to laugh at me for liking, and now you're the one who's talking about it.
Well, the great thing about Game of Thrones is that it's really ultimately it's just about people. Forget the dragons and forget the magic and the Lord of Light and all that. What made especially the first 4 seasons so good is all of those machinations, those political machinations and the backbiting and all that. That works no matter what environment you put it in. All of that window dressing, the fact that it takes place in Westeros and the fact that there is magic in the background and there are the dragons and all that, that's fine. And that draws in the genre crowd, but it was those characters and what they were putting up with and the betrayals and the primo. Game of Thrones is nothing if not a great soap opera.
Well, and Cobra Kai proves that, because that's a perfect example of how you don't need 30 million or 40 million or even 80 million dollars to make a great show. It's probably one of the cheapest shows to produce on, as far as, straight to digital streaming goes. And look at how popular it is, and it does a great job with its characters because it pays respect and homage to what happened in the past. It introduces us to new characters without just, oh, here's your new character. They're perfect. They're awesome. They're Mikey Spock, No, they actually have to learn. They have to grow. Our old characters are still learning and growing. They're not disrespecting the old characters, but at the same time, they're not putting them up on some pedestal. So for those who out there go, oh, you just wanted Luke to be, some super Jedi. No, I just wanted him to be treated with respect. You know, as you know, I've said before, Robert, I had no problem with them going with the Unforgiven version of Skywalker, but they didn't give us the payoff. They didn't
Right.
really truly give us that payoff to where it's like, okay, we know this is his last ride. You know, we get that feeling with Will, and then it doesn't end up being his last ride. But you get what I say. It's like this whole like build up of like, you know, my life ain't been worth nothing, but this moment is going to mean something. You know, that Unforgiven thing. You know, that whole, yeah, I'm done. I'm out of the game. But they got that same thing with Cobra Kai. You know, treat the old characters with respect. Don't negate what happened in the past, even if it isn't everybody's favorite bits. It's still important. They aren't reinventing Karate Kid just for a new crowd. I mean, they are, but they're not doing it in a sense like Star Trek is, or, you know, any of these other franchises we brought up here. It's really key with the characters, and that's what you're saying with why Game of Thrones was so popular, and that's the truth. And that's why Deadwood was so popular.
Right.
It had amazing characters you cared about, characters you believed and understood, and even if necessarily you didn't agree with, you still, you know, were with them. You wanted
Breaking Bad too, another example of
another great example. Yeah,
you know, I didn't watch that show when it was on, and I bought the collected Blu-ray set that came in the 50-gallon drum. It's a great Blu-ray set, and I'd heard about it, and I obviously, being a student of pop culture, I'd read so much about it. I just had never seen the show, and I sat down and binged the whole series, and I was blown away. Even though I knew about a lot of the changes or what was going to happen, I was completely absorbed by that show. I mean, it's set in a suburban New Mexico neighborhood. Really, you know, sometimes you get out to the desert, but even the villain owns fast food establishments, you know, Gus Fring, which they brought back. But it always comes down to the characters and the story that they're in. If you have great characters and a good story, you don't have to spend, say, $15 million an episode the way they spend that on Star Trek Discovery, even though they say they don't, but they're spending a lot more money on that show than they admit. And they don't need to. You know, it's really interesting. You look at a show like Star Trek Discovery, one of the things that bothers me about it the most is how big all the sets are. Like, you go into Pike's office. He's got this gigantic office, this cavernous office with these floors that are like polished. And every time I look at that, I was thinking about it from a production standpoint. I'm like, why would you have a set that costs this much to light and this much to keep clean before you can shoot on it? Like, why would you do that? You're on a ship that space is premium on a ship. You know, you don't have gigantic rooms like that. And why do you need that? I mean, I know they want to make it cinematic, but they're spending those kinds of sets cost more money to light, takes longer to shoot, setups, all that. And to me, you're cutting your own throat. It shows a fundamental lack of understanding of how a show like that should be produced, which is why it's so expensive. But then you look at a show like Breaking Bad, yeah, they have sets, but they're basically shooting in suburban New Mexico. And I ask you, what's more entertaining, Star Trek or Breaking Bad for me? I never would have thought I lived in a world where a Breaking Bad series would be way more entertaining to me than Star Trek. But it is.
It is. You're right. There's so many things I can look on Discovery, and I'm like, why do you need to be able to fly the little work bees throughout the inside of the ship? Why does it look like a roller coaster on the inside? Do you not understand how space works? Like, this is supposed to be, they don't understand how military works. They don't understand how anything. This is like a Navy ship in space. You know, there's a chain of command. It just drives me nuts. Everything about it.
No, but that's the funny thing. I mean, what I don't understand is they've already been given a universe that's been around for a long time. Why reinvent the universe? You already have the universe. Half the work you need to do is finished. You know, on a new science fiction show, you have to world build, but they were given the keys to the kingdom of where the world has already been built, and yet why are you spending time reinventing it? And what's interesting to me, I mean, I understand with Watchmen, it's a new take. It's a different take on Watchmen. If it's a sequel, I mean, they probably are being cagey about it because their marketing research tells them that, we can't say it's a sequel because we want people, they're literally marketing this show as if Watchmen doesn't exist previously. It's like they want their audience. We're not going after the people that read the comic or even that are familiar with the movies. We want the Game of Thrones audience to watch this and not know that it's based on anything else. I mean, it's like they want to trick their viewers. And indeed, their viewers don't know. I mean, how many of the audience really does know that there is a Watchmen comic, much less a Watchmen movie? I mean, certainly people who read the Watchmen comic is probably 2% of the HBO audience that's going to watch this show. And I hate to say it, but it is. So they almost don't want to admit that Watchmen is a previously existing IP. They're trying to sell it as this new prestige drama because they certainly aren't going from the acclaimed comic book series by Alan Moore. They've not mentioned that. From the movie by Zack Snyder, you remember, no.
Oh, yeah, they make sure it says original series, so it doesn't say, the continuing adventures of.
No,
right?
not at all. Not at all. And they're not promoting. And I understand why, because there's no money in promoting the old shows. Like, why should we do that? On my rant on Star Trek, on the brand, I'm like, you know what? Last year, Warner Brothers released 2001. They had a 70 millimeter release. Christopher Nolan supervised a release. They released a 4K Blu-ray and a 4K. They did a Blu-ray and a 4K HDR version of 2001. Well, what better way to celebrate this year, the 40th anniversary of Star Trek: The Motion Picture? Why not restore the director's cut, put it out in 4K, do a 4K restoration of the whole film for IMAX, put it out in theaters, and make a big deal of it? You could have an investment of between marketing, let's say $15 million. You bring back a huge Star Trek event. You have a Star Trek movie in the theaters, albeit, of course, it's a re-release, but you tout it easy. And you're doing the Star Trek brand, promoting the Star Trek brand. Not a bad idea. You follow Warner Brothers, what they did with 2001. Nobody currently in charge of Star Trek is interested in doing anything remotely similar to that. They're like, we're not selling a 40-year-old movie. Yeah, but you've got a brand manager. What better way to promote the brand than with one of your this prestige film that you could have restored? You've got Robert Wise, the director of Sound of Music, of West Side Story, of which Steven Spielberg is remaking right now. You could do this and get it into theaters and promote your brand, but nobody's interested in doing that because it's not theirs. They don't get the cheddar from it. But if you want to promote your brand, if you want to promote Star Trek as a brand, it's the entire brand. It's not just, we've got all these new shows that are untried, that nobody's watching yet. I mean, it's crazy to me. Whereas Marvel embraces their past. Marvel goes back, let's see what comic book stories we should adapt. They understand. Kevin Feige made 13 Marvel movies before he worked on the MCU. He saw what worked, what didn't work, and they keep hiring people who work on Star Trek that don't love Star Trek, that don't have a particular affinity for the genre. Well, let's hire him anyway. He created the closer. He should write the Picard series. Oh, okay. Because he worked in television. It's very weird.
Yeah, there's a saying in sports: the guys who make the best coaches are the guys who never play. And Kevin Feige is very much that guy. I mean, he was on the sidelines. He saw what worked. He saw how everything functions. And then when he got his opportunity, he knew exactly what to do. But the other thing about Star Trek, though, I mean, I've said this before. I've said this before repeatedly to the Red Shirts and other guys we talk with. There seems to be this thinking, and this can go for Watchmen too. There is this thinking that they being HBO, CBS, whomever, this is what they want you to think of when you think of Star Trek or Watchmen.
Right.
They don't want, like they don't. Oh no, all this other stuff. No, that you don't need to know that. No, look, we got the nice shiny new ship and the new characters that you're gonna love. So you don't have to be invested in that 50 years of history. You could just jump right in.
Well, that takes time.
Yeah, but that's an incredible disservice, though, because that is what got you here. All that 50 years of history, all that Alan Moore comic, all the other stuff. This is what got you here. This is why it's so revered. And to just discard that is like a gigantic middle finger. to both the audience and to into the material itself.
Well, and it also does a disservice to the brand. You know, and look, admittedly, Star Trek is an aging fan base. Star Trek really is a product of its time. The two greatest things in Star Trek history are the original series and Next Generation. When Next Generation went off the air in 94, Star Trek was arguably at its zenith in terms of popularity. Next Generation had huge numbers when it went off the air, and it really changed first run syndication. You had Generations that was going to come out. I mean, it was on the cover of Time magazine. Star Trek was huge back then. And then it began a slow decline of that. And what did they do? You know, they go back to the well. They try and reinvent Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. They go back, and yet they want you, like you just said, this is the new Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. This is the real Kirk. This is the Kirk, Spock, McCoy of now. There was no other Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. It's just this Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And yet what was so funny was all they tried to do in those movies is remind you of where they had been, as opposed to forging. Like, you could have really done, they basically took these very superficial elements of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, of the entire Star Trek franchise. It was the way Star Trek is understood by my mom, you know. And they could have done a really interesting re-examination of these characters from a much different level. A much more, I would say, dare say, adult level, rather than give them superficial character traits. And you can go, oh, Dr. McCoy, I recognize Carl Urban's doing an incredible imitation. He's bang on DeForest Kelley. Well, why'd you have to do that? Like, you could make the Dr. McCoy character his own version of McCoy. You know, why do you have to do a version that's redolent of DeForest Kelley? You know, if you're going to start over and show us this different version, go all in. You know, and we didn't get that. We got a superficial, dumbed down version of the original. And it's fun. Hey, but that, did that bring them the $1 billion box office success they'd hoped? No. I mean, you know, when they were spending that kind of money up front, it's like this Watchmen series. You got to earn it. You got to earn it. And they want to pretend that, oh, no, there's no other Watchmen than what you're getting. None. It's not there, man. And it doesn't work. It's never worked. It's never worked.
That's actually probably a perfect segue into the next part of our story here. I don't know if you've heard this yet, Robert. I'm sure you have. They are remaking the movie Cliffhanger.
I read that.
Not only are they remaking it, they're gender swapping it. Rob, do you have this up here?
I got it somewhere.
Did you want to get the super chat?
Oh yeah, we had
yeah.
That's right. Yeah, Robert gets talking, and we don't want to stop him because he's just a wealth of knowledge.
Oh no, just stop me. I'll go.
No,
on.
never, sir. Never, ever. Sir. Not a chance. Not unless I think you're going to get yourself in some kind of legal trouble. That'd be the only time. Go ahead, Rob, with the super chat.
Yes, Captain Hare, $5. An hour late 2 days in a row. Oh well, is Rob awake this time? If not, poke him with something rage-inducing. Oh boy. Yeah, my Sam will emerge. Hey! It's not part of the deal. So, yeah.
So, Robert, right. I can assume you were a fan of the Sylvester Stallone Cliffhanger film from '93, right?
Sure, it's fine. You know, to me, it was another Die Hard, a movie that was inspired by Die Hard, but it was fun. You know, it was fun. It's fine.
Yeah.
Do we need another one? Like, it's very funny to me. It's like you know, I don't. Is gender swapping an old idea the best thing in the world, or if you're going to have women protagonists and women directors, I would rather see something new than take something old and flip it. Like,
yeah, they didn't even learn with Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman never had a movie before. They had a strong female director, strong female character, original female character, didn't have to remake anything that wasn't there before or reflip it or flop it. What happened? Huge hit. Hollywood took no notice whatsoever. Sorry.
And also, Patty Jenkins had to fight a lot of battles to make the movie she wanted to make. It wasn't just
like that movie that much, but I do stick up for it.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, it's just bizarre, like because again, let's remake Cliffhanger. Well, why? Why remake Cliffhanger? Because people remember Cliffhanger like from 19. Do they? You know, I think how many? Why not remake Air Force One instead? Make the female president. You know, why not do that? Why Cliffhanger? Because somebody bought the rights, I guess.
Probably. Rob, were you a fan?
Me? It was all right. It was all right movie. From what I
You
remember.
like that movie?
Yeah. It was, you know,
We,
not my
I
favorite,
got
but
hang out on a cliff. Big flying helicopter.
yeah. Well,
Like,
anyway,
did you like my movie?
no, I didn't. Okay, no.
See, Demolition Man was more memorable.
I like Demolition Man too.
Yeah.
But I didn't ask you if you. But it's a good movie.
The whole thing. I mean, it's just a current trend though in Hollywood. I mean, you have to have an all female Ghostbusters and all female Ocean's 11 and all.
Didn't they just do this with Dirty Rotten Scoundrels?
Yeah, with Rebel Wilson and yeah. It seems for me, okay. It seems like you're trying to pander to an audience who didn't want the first movie. Women don't really want the cliffhanger. I mean, you'll have one or two women who are actually rock climbers who care about this, but they would probably go watch the original if they really wanted to see cliffhanger. They don't want to see something that's like, oh, it's for you now because we've gender swapped it. We don't care.
Or to go rock climbing.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
One thing they are not going to have that the other one has, and that's me.
Wow.
And yeah, like 90% of that movie was just the name appeal, right? Wasn't it like, oh, hey, new Sylvester Stallone movie?
Yeah, it's basically Die Hard on a Mountain with Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah,
That's the appeal, is that it had Sylvester Stallone in it, and that's about it. And
well, what's interesting is we don't even live in a world anymore where people are going to the movie theaters to see those kinds of films. Even Dwayne Johnson's Skyscraper movie that came out wasn't the hit that everybody thought it was going to be. I mean, it's not even Die Hard. They literally called the movie Skyscraper. And you're supposed to be excited about this? I mean, we live in a world where I think our entertainment, especially our genre entertainment, is a little bit more sophisticated.
can you imagine the pitch for that, though? Skyscraper. It's Die Hard in a building.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Wait a minute. Wasn't Die Hard already in a building? Yeah, but this one's going to be on fire. Yeah, but wasn't that Towering Inferno?
I mean, what's really interesting to me is Cliffhanger. When I think about Cliffhanger, I think about the opening scene where Sylvester Stallone let go of a female climber who fell to her death. And that's so they're going to gender swap that. So the main character is going to let go of her. What? I mean, what's interesting to me is I'm all for inclusion in Hollywood. I think it's great, but I want to see like, what would a female action film be like if it had one of the things I'll say about Ocean's 8 is that the heist being that it took place at the Met Gala and all that, it made sense that the characters, the protagonists, it didn't feel like it was just gender swapped. It felt like, okay, you've got a heist movie and it made sense. They really made it work with the female characters. I thought it was great. I mean, I liked Ocean's 8, but the Cliffhanger, it's like, who is this supposed to appeal to? Exactly.
I just said this in the chat, and it's true, at least in my opinion. Yeah, it's a mid-level to decent Stallone film, but that's just it. Because of Stallone being in the movie makes it that movie. Otherwise, it's no better than your average TV movie of the week. The story.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What is so engaging about this story that's going to get people in the theaters to see it regardless? Because nobody went to see it the first time, really. I mean, it wasn't one of his huge hits. It didn't flop, but
right.
I mean, I don't get the appeal here.
I mean, the idea of gender swapping this kind of role isn't necessarily an original idea. I mean, wasn't Reindeer Games just a gender swap Born Identity? Something like that was with the one with
Ben Affleck, the one that John Frankenheimer directed, that Reindeer Games.
No. There's one. Oh God, who was it? Gina, what's her name? She was married to.
The Long Kiss Goodnight.
Yeah,
the Shane Black wrote. Yeah, that was. Yeah, but you know, I think what's interesting is there's a lot of like one of my favorite horror films of the last 20 years is a movie called The Descent that Neil Marshall directed about these women climbers that go cave diving. And if you guys haven't seen The Descent, it's great.
Oh, I heard about that movie. That
It's
looked
great.
interesting.
It's really good. And you watch it and you're like, okay, these are 5 friends. They're athletic women, good characters, and they all decide to go. They cave dive. You know, they're climbers. And it felt organic to the story, and things don't go well, and it's really scary, and it's got creatures in it, and it's really good. It wasn't a gender swapped movie. It was designed to be a film built around female protagonists. It's both an action horror film. It's terrifying, and it works really, really well. You know, and if you're gonna do these kinds of action movies, and you're gonna start hiring female characters or female directors and have more inclusion, why not make the stories appealing on that level? Why just, instead of gender swapping something that already worked, why not create an original vision that has female protagonists? You know, you're setting yourself up because immediately you're already looking like you're pandering somehow. You know, like you're doing something that first and foremost is all about the gender as opposed to the story that you want. Once again, to never put your universe before your story and your characters. And in a way, they're putting their universe of inclusion before their story and their characters. In the sense, that's why they're gender swapping something that's a named commodity as opposed to something brand new, because that's harder to do. And then the audience goes in and goes, well, we loved Ghostbusters since 1984, and now we're going to make it an all-female Ghostbusters, but immediately you're hamstringing your female cast and your director, because they're going to always be unfavorably, unless it's stellar, unfavorably compared to the original. And it just seems like the reason it was done in the first place is something that's pandering. It's not even organic. They're just, here's a way we hope to make money. And has anything gender swapped made the kind of money the original made?
Not that I can think of offhand.
And yet they keep doing it. I mean, if I was a female director and I'd work my way up to the point of where I was going to be directing a feature film, I'd want to make my own feature film, something new and original, something that I could bring in, something intrinsic, something that my perspective could add or bring something new.
Right.
And that's what I think the female audience, it's so weird. Look, the reason that Black Panther became a cultural success, and not just because it was a good movie or a Marvel movie, but because you had an audience that was underserved, that got to see themselves writ large on the big screen, but it was organic to the film. It wasn't like, we're going to make a movie about African Americans. No, the character of Black Panther that had been around since 1966, and the African nation of Wakanda and all of this stuff demanded the kind of treatment that it was given. And this audience that was underserved got to see representation they'd never had before in any kind of a movie. It caught on worldwide. And I think any audience that doesn't have these kinds of things, a female-led action franchise, Lucy, even though it wasn't great, it still made a lot of money. You know, I think half of our population's female. What they want is they want to get female-led films directed by women that are organically awesome and not about gender swapping an old movie and just sticking female characters in the lead role. That's not what anybody wants.
No. I'm curious your thoughts on Atomic Blonde. I haven't seen it, but a lot of people are saying that, yeah, that kind of it put like a good female action hero sort of.
I liked it. I mean, I think that it did, you know, and again, your protagonist, that's why I'm hoping that the Black Widow movie could be great. I know I guess it's a prequel and it's sort of globe trotting, and I like that character. I like the idea of that character, and I'd love to see where she came from. And again, Atomic Blonde, it was organic. It didn't feel like, ooh, we're making a gimmicky movie and where a female. Look, I loved the first season, especially. I loved Alias for what it was. The first season I thought was terrific. The show went downhill halfway through the second season when they took down SD6. But I mean, That was great. I love that. I mean, sure, in the way I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You know, I mean, these things were organic. That you had these characters, you had female leads, which were organic to the material. It worked really well. You had all kinds of different representation in that show. The character of Willow and same-sex relationships and all that. It felt organic to what they had set up. That's all people want. They want to believe in their entertainment. They want to get entertainment that isn't pandering, that feels legit.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I would rather tell me who the character is. You know, I don't want to know. It seems like so much all the time that, like, every time I see an article or an interview or something like this article on screen, female fronted. Okay, so the only important thing is what's in between her legs. Got it. Nothing else matters in this whole movie, and that is just so. It's cheap. It feels disrespectful to the actors, to the characters. You know, even if you bring in, you know, ethnic diversity or LGBT representation, any of these things, when that's all these characters are, is the superficial stuff, I don't care about them as much, you know? And 9 times out of 10, like, even if Star Trek Discovery, for example, doesn't make a point in the show to say, "Hey, look at us, we're diverse in the show," it's the marketing that does. And I think that a lot of that really hurts your potential audience, because we're going to see that and we're like, oh, okay, just another reboot. It's a gender swap. Who cares? We're going to move on. Tell me something about the character in the articles. Tell me something about it a little more in depth. And I don't think a lot of the time they even go that far. I think they just, you know, oh, the committee says, or, you know, the focus group says we need to remake this, and gender swapping's popular. People talk about it. It trends on Parrot Analytics, so we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, and I don't think it doesn't, the audience that is supposed to be excited about this ultimately is not going to get excited about it. I mean, I cannot recommend The Descent enough. Neil Marshall's The Descent. You go see that and you're like, why aren't we getting more movies like that? You know, and I, as a dude, didn't turn on The Descent and go, oh, I'm not going to watch this movie because it's about a bunch of girls going climbing. I never thought that. You settle into your seat, you watch the story, you get engrossed in it, and it kicks ass. Because no one said we have to make a female-fronted horror film.
All horror films like that I grew up on were female fronted. We had badass women, like, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, for example. We had Nancy, we had Alice, we had Kristen. We always had the badass women. I always grew up with that, you know, and I grew up with TV characters on, you know, Star Trek or Babylon 5 who were great badass women.
Oh,
Stargate, all of these things. I never felt like I needed that representation because I always had it, and I had other characters like Cisco that I could look up to. I don't look or I don't look anything like Cisco in many ways than one, like, more ways than one. I don't need to see myself on screen. I'm never going to be represented 100%. Just write a character that I care about. Let them speak for themselves. It does not have to be about the superficial.
Yeah,
well, like you just said, you know, go ahead.
Sorry, no. I was just making a joke. Go ahead.
Well, what you just said, Becca, is that you grew up with lots of female characters that you admired, you know, over the last 20 years. And there's this weird that I think there's a lot more now we've gone identity politics crazy, and people forget, especially in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, both on TV and in the movies, there's been a lot of representation. And people have forgotten about that. You just listed off a number of shows that had very strong female characters. You know, I just watched the new Deep Space Nine documentary, and there's a lot of kick-ass female characters on that show too, including Salome Jens, who was in one of my favorite science fiction movies of the 60s, this movie called Seconds. She ran the Founders that were going to take over the Alpha Quadrant. I mean, she was a changeling, but she was a female changeling. I mean, it's funny that people forget these things. And you know, now it's all about, well, we have to have representation first and foremost. Nobody wants that. Again, people want great stories well told, and a well told story has good representation included. It's intrinsic into the DNA of whatever it is whatever story is being told. You know, you can't put your universe before your characters and your story. You just can't.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And, you know, there's all kinds of other like I brought up, you know, the whole thing about Wonder Woman earlier. It's like there's already strong female characters out there. Just use them. Ripley, Sarah Connor, Red Sonja, Supergirl, Laurie Strode, all those before were, you know, strong female characters. And I could probably pull 100 more out of the horror film hat, like Mecca was saying, you know, that are just tons of them. You know, they act like they're breaking new ground, but guess what? You're not Christopher Columbus. You're not discovering anything new. Even Christopher Columbus didn't even discover anything that new. Sorry to break it to you. People been there and done that. People forget that Supergirl, we had a Supergirl movie back in 1984. You know, it's like before Batman, before we had a Batman movie, technically, if you want to not count the 66 Batman anyway, we had a legit full-on Supergirl movie, like it or not, well before a lot of these other franchises. So you can't act like you're breaking new ground when you're not, especially Star Trek. Star Trek broke so much ground to begin with. The rest of it has been playing catch up ever since, but they didn't really have to, because that original version gave them carte blanche to be able to go so many different places. The Discovery and the sound of this new Picard show with, you know, what Robert's been saying here is like, it's just kind of putting it more and more into this box. You know, it's like, no. Star Trek is this big, huge thing. And as long as you get the idea right, you can do so much in this sandbox, because this sandbox is huge compared to some. And I think they're just missing the boat with this time and time again, unfortunately. And yeah, we're getting back on to Star Trek.
Not only that, though, they go out of their way to pick on the original and dismiss and be offended by the groundbreaking work they did. Look at the mini skirts. You know, they're offended by them all of a sudden. They're empowering you morons. What is wrong with you?
How fast are they to just let go of the fact that Nichelle Nichols was arguably the first Black lead in a major television show that wasn't a maid or something like that?
She wasn't a maid. She wasn't a secretary. She was a respected officer. Yeah. She, you know,
what Whoopi Goldberg said, Mama, there's a Black lady on TV and she ain't no maid. That's her exact quote.
Oh yeah, but you know, all that stuff is that's from the old show. I mean, it's very weird today. You know,
they don't that's the equivalent to like if you did Star Trek and had a big gay orgy on it. Yeah. Really, I mean, that's how far ahead that show was, to have a Black character, a Black lead lady who is on the bridge, a major part of the show, pretty much in the lead. Like I said, you know, it was unheard of at that time. Like, other than, you know, having the nanny or the maid or this or that random character, there was very few programs where Blacks were the lead, that they had that for them on TV, and that was so progressive at that time. Not only that, then you had the infamous kiss, you know, which totally blew the lid off of it all. And I mean, to even sit there and pretend that they're breaking new ground when this kind of stuff has happened already 50 years ago is just pretentious.
Oh, and Discovery wants to be edgy, and they don't even have the stones to actually be edgy half the time. You know, they're like, oh yes, we're going to be Game of Thrones in space, and we're going to show this dead Klingon baby skull. They didn't have the guts to actually go through with it and actually be edgy. You know, like your suggestion of the gay orgy. They could actually do that. They're on CBS All Access. They could actually show the nudity, the sex, they could actually make it a little more edgy than they do. And they always pull it back. And then, you know, then we hear stuff like Barry Weissman saying how 7-year-olds love Tilly, you know, even though Tilly's off getting high, smoking whatever she's smoking with Clint Howard. Like, it's crazy to me, this whole show. It's like, do you want to be edgy? Who's your audience? Do you want to have this new edgy, you know, R-rated Game of Thrones audience? Do you want us old farts who like Star Trek TOS? What do you want?
Well, I wasn't trying to be lewd. Sorry, I just want to say I wasn't trying to be lewd or anything. I was just trying to show the extreme of how far remiss of what it would have been then compared to now. What they would have to do to really amp up. We're progressive on this show, because I'm sorry, like I said before, you've been there, done that already. Go ahead, Robert. I'm sorry.
Oh, I don't think I think what they're showing, the relationships they're showing, they're puerile and they're unbelievably immature. The maturity level, the interpersonal relationships that they're showing on Star Trek Discovery are borderline offensive. I mean, the relationship between Stamets and Culber, really, they show them in a sink once, brushing their teeth together in the morning. That's supposed to be progressive. I mean, it isn't
Really bad.
It's not good. And you know, like you said, Mecca, if you want to show real adult situations, nothing about that show is believable to me. No one acts like a human being. Nobody acts like a real person. Nobody acts like they're actually on a ship that has some kind of discipline on it. It's almost like they're in an office in San Jose. Yeah, and there's the only thing
An
we haven't
elementary school, maybe.
Yeah, we haven't seen the HR department, which I'm sure we're going to see on the Discovery at some point in the future. You know, coming in and
it's more of a secret than Section 31. I just wanted to bring that up.
I mean, Section 31, a secret. They've got an entire headquarters. They've got. I mean, it's again, even Section 31 is written as if I was in the 7th fucking grade. Here's my super secret organization. It's amazing to me. I mean, Section 31 in Deep Space Nine was one dude who you'd wake up and he would be in your bedroom looking at you sleeping, which was far scarier and far more sinister than anything they ever did on Star Trek Discovery. It's like, have you guys ever read a book about any kind of intelligence agency at all? Do you watch movies? Do you watch Killing Eve? You know, do you watch Bodyguard from the BBC? Have you ever watched anything about any super secret organization? Because you guys look like the Section 31 on Discovery looks like it's just one step above Scooby-Doo. I mean, it's really terrible. It's just and you see there's so many great but again, Deep Space Nine, you look back, the portrayal of Section 31 on Deep Space Nine is like PhD level storytelling as opposed to writing my first short story in 7th grade the way Star Trek Discovery is. I mean, it's just those Sloan episodes. That's what Section 31 is. It's one guy. You don't know if he's telling you the truth. You don't know what the hell's going on. You don't even know, you know, he walks out of your stateroom on Deep Space Nine. You run out after him and he's gone. That's it. You don't know where he went. You don't know if there's anybody around him. You don't know anything. And that's why it was a great thing. That's why Section 31 developed a following amongst the fan base. That's why people like Section 31, because when you had a great charismatic actor in Bill Sadler playing Sloan, and then you made him incredibly mysterious. No special effects. You don't even see him beam out of any place. He just walks through a door and he's gone. I mean, that's all you need to know. But in Section 31, man, yeah, we've got a whole consortium of people that we talk to people all the time. Hey, here we are, Section 31's here. Move aside, like they're the FBI or something.
I know they have all these ships. Since when did they have even one ship? I don't remember even them having one ship.
Because you're not supposed to know. That's the whole point. Yeah. You don't know what Section 31 has.
Working together. That's all you need to know. The Grim Reaper is the head of Section 31. He comes in, he goes. That's all you need to know.
That's it. That's all you see.
Well, to elaborate on the juvenile writing too, though, just look at Michael Burnham and Spock's argument. That was the whole story arc for why they never spoke. It was so stupid. It was, oh, you hurt my feelings or something. It was such a 7-year-old thing to be upset about, to still hold a grudge into their 30s. Oh, it's ridiculous. Like, are you children?
The character of Spock was horribly, horribly written.
Oh, at least he told her off.
It was a bastardization of the entire character. You know, it to me, it was a singular misunderstanding of 50 years of pop culture lore about a character. And but not to bash Star Trek Discovery, the worst science fiction show ever made, but we could. I don't. It's such low hanging fruit. And now we can't even. I'm going to do what the characters on the show told me to do. Never talk about it again. Never speak about it again. I'm going to take their advice. They broke the fourth wall for me. I'm like, oh, I can do that.
I know.
I can never talk about the show again. But again, they it's funny because they're trying to create this myth that Star Trek Discovery is this incredibly successful show. That by their articles. I mean, what was it? Screen Rant when they said that the article, they came out and said Screen Rant exclusively reports. I'm like, wouldn't you want to report that in the Hollywood Reporter or Variety or perhaps the Wall Street Journal, some legitimate place where, you know, it could affect your bottom line with your shareholders and people that might be interested in subscribing or financing CBS All Access? But no, Screen Rant reports this. Like, really, guys?
About the article we were talking about last night.
Yeah.
You don't know why? Because those other organizations that you mentioned have journalistic integrity, at least not to print bullshit.
Right.
Because you're aware that prepared analytics is just a bunch of horse shit.
I think I get more views than Discovery, and I actually made a video on this one that's going to be coming out tomorrow. Yeah, I get more clicks than Star Trek's channel, like their official Star Trek YouTube channel, talking about interviews with behind the scenes. My channel gets more views.
Well, it's a bunch of fugazi. Because I talked about it last night, but real quick, this is what happened. I found an article about, you know, Cobra Kai is streaming's #1 show in the world. And this was March 5th or May 5th, I mean, or May 2nd, one of the two. Anyway, it was just a couple days ago I found it and read it. And I'm like reading it and I'm like, oh, Parrot Analytics, never mind. You know, right. But I know Cobra Kai has had well over, I think now it's over, I think it's, if it hasn't, it's close to 30,000 views on its, or
25 million views when I looked last.
25 million, I was going to say almost 30 million views on the first episode of the second season alone. So right there tells you that this show is a huge hit. And I'm like, okay, I can buy that, but this is Parrot Analytics. Sure, a lot of people were talking about it because it was just on, you know. And then all of a sudden this other article pops up, not before, but after the Cobra Kai one, claiming that Star Trek Discovery is the most popular digital streaming show in the world. So I'm like, okay, so which is
it? And the other thing too is, Tom, like I said, like I pointed out, they put the Grand Tour at #4. Now, there is no way you can tell me that Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May, who had 500 million with a B viewers at their height on Top Gear when they were on the BBC, only has the #4 most watched, most popular show in streaming. And was no way.
And was The Good Fight even mentioned? Because last I heard, and this is, I can't confirm this, but I thought I had heard or read somewhere that The Good Fight is actually a bigger hit for them than Discovery is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look at Netflix.
TV, yeah.
Netflix spent $100 million in the year of 2019 so they could keep Friends on the air, so they can keep airing Friends. I mean, that's very telling in this age of streaming. $100 million for a show that's 20 years old.
And it has not aged well either.
Hey, listen, kids, I have to jump off.
Yeah,
I got
yeah.
But it's been great. Thanks for sending me the link and inviting me on. It was a pleasure.
Oh, anytime, you know that.
Thank you, Mr.
We had that too. Sorry about that, Rob. What?
I said thank you, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, for joining us.
Oh, I love it. I love you. I love coming in here and bitching and moaning and complaining. But, you know, I want to leave everybody with this. I want everything to be good. I really do. You know, I go into everything. Anytime someone's spending big money on genre programming, anything science fiction, fantasy, and horror, I show up. I'll watch it. I want it to be good. So does my dog. All right. Well, I will see you guys later.
All right.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Check out the Burnett work. That's where you can find him, of course. That is Mr. Robert Burnett. Legend among YouTubers and Star Trek fans alike. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I didn't expect him to necessarily show up, but that was a nice surprise. So what was supposed to be a nice short show turned into a hey, I'll let Robert talk all day long.
I know.
I won't stop him unless I'll be like,
so
lawyers.
What do you say? We got anything else to cover, or should we?
I think we're gonna save it. It's been such a long night. We've had so much fun already with Robert here, and again, we want to thank him so much for stopping by for the show, being through the whole show basically with us. And of course, Mecca, as always, we want to thank you for being here. Tell us where they can find you, and Rob, you can take us out.
Well, I am MechaRandom42. I have my channel. You can click my name in the link. I rant, and I'm over here all the time. I'm over on Creepy Little Book all the time. I think that's it. I always forget where. Just you know where to find me. You'll see me. You can't miss me. I have bright red hair.
She's like Visa. She's everywhere you want to be. Okay, that's so old I could vote.
I laughed. I was just muted.
That doesn't even get the real one.
Nike, you laugh at far too many of my jokes. You're too.
I laughed. Yeah.
She laughs a lot, but that's why we love her, because
Yeah,
she's
exactly.
really amused by our jokes.
Ebullient. Look up what that word means. All right, everybody. You can find us here. Click like, subscribe on here, the main channel, the bell icons. Like, subscribe over there. Patreon, $1 a month will get you, starting at $1 a month, it'll get you bloopers, outtakes, lost episodes, behind the edge making videos, my 10-minute stand-up set, and more. If you don't have the means to subscribe or support us on Patreon, like, subscribe, share the hell out of these videos because we cannot do this without you. Check out our friends, Captain April. Check out Clownfish TV, Egotastic Fun Time. Check out Jesse Milestone. Check out Nerdrotic. Check out Doomcock. Check out Professor Geek. Check out the Fan Man. Check out everybody because everybody's checking you out. That's the kind of age we live in. No
Plus,
privacy.
it's not a competition, too.
Yeah, it's not a competition. Oh, and check out Mary Mayhem too. She's a lot of fun. Okay, everybody, and not last but certainly not least. Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us, everybody. Oh, check out the Wilk Report too, the Rookie Critic, and all those other guys. I think that's everybody. Okay, well, anyway, thanks for joining us. We will definitely catch you next time.
Yeah,
What was that, Tom?
definitely check out the Rookie Critic. He's been doing some really good stuff lately. He has got a video about Brie Larson right now that's pretty funny.
Actually, Tom. All right, take care, everybody.
I'm Krispy Kreme McDonald's.
Only on Tuesdays, though.
You're fired.
Do I have the finger?
What's up?
You knocked up my mom and never called her again.